How's it going, guys? Today we're going to talk about the best camera settings to capture lightning. This is the fourth episode in our tutorial series. The first episode was about radar apps. The second episode was about safety. The third episode was about the camera gear that you need. And now this episode, the fourth episode, is about settings. So every time we post a lightning photo to our socials, we always get asked, what settings did we use? What's the best settings to capture lightning? And the truth is, the settings are always changing. So you have three main lightning shooting environments. You have daytime bolts, sunset/dusk bolts, and nighttime bolts. So all three of those, your settings are going to be different for. And we're going to go over that in this episode. But before we go over that, if you're new to photography, you need to get a base understanding of what's called the exposure triangle. So if you go and do a YouTube search for exposure triangle, there's hundreds of videos that will show up. And I recommend you watch a couple of them to kind of get a base understanding of how ISO speeds, shutter, and aperture all work in concert with each other, because that's going to go a long way into how you're going to expose for lightning. The lighting for lightning, that environment is always changing. So we are always doing this tango, this dance to dial in the right speeds and everything. Because not only do we need to get that right, but for daytime we're using ND filters when necessary, and sometimes a lightning sensor to trigger our camera. So we at Big Bolt Media use two different lightning sensors. We use the MIOPS and we use the StrikeFinder. They're both excellent. We'll go into them in a little bit of detail a little later in this video. You can skip ahead to there if you want to check those out now. So we're just going to jump right in to shooting daytime lightning. So to capture daytime bolts, you're going to need a narrow aperture and a slow shutter. You're going to need some ND filters, usually 1-stop to 3-stop ND filters. And that way you could slow down your shutter a little bit, better chance of catching bolts. You'll most definitely need a lightning sensor. Unless you're going to do a time lapse, the lightning sensor is going to help trigger your camera to lightning. Because if you don't have a lightning sensor and you're not doing a time lapse, then you're going to use the canvassing burst style, or some people call it spray and pray. Just try and get what you can. So that's not the best method, but it is the only other option if you're not going to do a time lapse or have a lightning sensor to trigger the camera.
I highly recommend getting a lightning trigger if you want to venture into daytime lightning shooting, because it is able to capture that split second a lightning bolt strikes, and that split second counts when photographing in bright sunlight.
80% of the storms that we get in the summertime are in daylight hours. So if we want to capture bolts, we mostly have to learn how to shoot them in the daytime. Now, personally, I prefer shooting nighttime bolts because I feel, again, personally, that the aesthetic is a little bit better. I like the contrast of the bright bolt again in the dark background. So to me, that's more appealing than the daytime bolts, but it's not that daytime bolts are terrible or anything. They're good when you can capture them, so therein lies the challenge. Shooting daytime lightning is easily the hardest thing to do. Daytime and sunset time are the hardest lightning to capture. The reason that daytime lightning is so hard to capture, the light from the lightning bolt is in direct competition with the light from daylight, from the sun. So you have two competing light sources, and we're trying to harness that to capture it. In this shot, I'm doing everything I can. I'm running a narrow aperture at f13. I'm at 1/30th of a second. My ISO's at 100. I'm not capturing any of the fingers, any of the filaments. This type of lightning shot, you're going to get 99 times out of 100. Like this one or this one, these daytime bolts, we're just getting the bolt itself. And that is hard enough to do in daytime, but ultimately we're looking for the fingers, the filaments, like so. This is an excellent shot that Damon took. The lightning is really close, so he's at f16, and with a 1/10 shutter, he has a 10-stop ND filter on, so it could almost pass as a nighttime bolt, but he nailed the perfect fraction of a second and got all the filaments, all the fingers, and that's the goal. A shot like this is the goal. When you shoot daytime lightning, you're going to get shots like this. So this is a handheld shot out of my car window. This is what you're going to get 9 times out of 10 for the daylight bolts. Again, the ultimate goal is to get this one. This is kind of where luck comes into it a little bit, is that you can have your settings dialed as best you can. The filaments are even more susceptible to the light battle. They're going to blend in more with the existing light, so they're even harder to capture versus the lighting environment. That's the game. And that's kind of where luck's involved. Did your shutter go off that fraction of a second where the filaments are perfect? In our episode that we talked about what camera gear you need to capture lightning, I remarked that any camera could capture lightning. There was one time I was out shooting, just randomly. I was shooting by the Skyway Bridge here in St. Pete. I wasn't out shooting lightning, I was just shooting random scenes. And it wasn't until I got home that night that I found this photo, and I had captured this bolt. Now this is my shutter speed is at 1/1250. Now that's an incredibly fast shutter speed to capture lightning. So I'd never be able to do that on purpose. That was just super lucky. That's why I was saying that any camera can capture lightning, because you can get lucky like that. As you can see, all the filaments there, that was rad. But you don't want to ever chase lightning and set your shutter to be that fast, because you'll never get them. You couldn't even get that if you tried. That's why I like this photo so much. It was just so lucky. So for sunset lightning, when you're shooting at dusk, it's going to work on the same principles as the daytime lightning. Your shutter speed is going to be slow, your aperture is going to be narrow. However, when you're losing light, when the sun's going down, you're going to be expanding, opening up your aperture little by little. You're going to be lengthening your shutter little by little, and that is going to be constantly changing. The more light you lose, the more you have to adjust for that. It's just your shutter speed's dragging a little more and a little more, and next thing you know, you're shooting 2 seconds, then 4 seconds long, then 8 seconds, then 15 seconds. So it's just adjusting to the loss of light, and that's basically sunset shooting. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that maybe you might have multiple cameras going on, or maybe you're with a group of friends and you're talking and you're letting a lightning sensor trigger off your camera. Now, you're going to have to be wary of the loss of light, and the loss of light happens fairly quickly, so you always have to keep changing that, keep adjusting it. So if you're kind of preoccupied with something else, then some of your photos are going to be underexposed. So that's sunset shooting. For nighttime bolts, they're my favorite and they're pretty much the easiest, but you still have to adjust for the lighting in your surroundings.
Photographing nighttime lightning is a lot easier because you can really open up your shutter. I like to shoot at 30-second exposures and at an aperture between f8 to f11. I change my ISO depending on how dark the foreground is. Typically I stay between ISO 100 and 800. Anything greater than that, the photo gets too noisy. You can also use a lightning trigger when photographing nighttime lightning to save some shutter clicks, or you can use a cable release and lock down your camera on continuous shooting so that your camera just keeps taking photo after photo after photo.
We like to keep our f-stop, our aperture, right in kind of the sweet spot, kind of like from f8 to f11. If the lightning is a lot closer, then we'll narrow the aperture a little bit so we don't overexpose for the lightning being so close. So then we'll go up to f13, f14, sometimes f16 if the lightning is really close. And if it's really far away, then you can drop it down to like f7.1 or f5.6. You just got to remember when the lightning bolt flashes, when it pops, then that's going to provide most of the light in your image. And the battle is that you don't want to overexpose for the bolt. So that's why we're always doing the dance. We got to figure out our shutter speed, our ISO speed, our aperture. We got to work that in concert so we're not blowing out the bolt. And yet the scene is still exposed well enough in the dark, whether it's a pitch black scene or a cityscape or a rural road or whatever it is. That's the game. You just don't want to overexpose for the bolt. You want to make sure the bolt doesn't blow out. As long as it doesn't blow out too badly, you're all right. So to recap, when you're shooting daytime lightning, you want to keep a narrow aperture. You want to focus to infinity, so that way you'll have the entire scene in focus and the lightning bolt. You want to keep your ISO speeds low, usually around 100, but 50 to 200 is good. You want to use ND filters to help you get your shutter speed down. So you can use an ND filter, 1 stop through a 3 stop. That'll slow your shutter speed down enough so you can get it to 1/10 of a second or 1/125th. You also want to use a lightning sensor because they help out immensely when shooting daytime bolts. So for sunset lightning, you're going to be using all the same settings for daylight lightning, but you're going to be constantly adjusting your settings for the loss of light. You want to eventually remove your ND filter. The one aspect you'll go to most will be setting longer and longer shutter speeds the more light you lose. So you'll be going from a fraction of a second to 1 second, and then 2 seconds, and then 4 seconds, and then 5 seconds, and you get it. You're just going to keep lengthening the shutter speed to capture the bolts. So to recap, for nighttime lightning, easier than the other two, daytime and sunset bolts. We want to keep an aperture between f8 and f11. If the bolts are closer, narrow it a little bit. We want to leave your shutter open from anywhere from 20 to 30 seconds is a good time. And your ISO speed is going to be what you adjust mostly for nighttime, depending on your ambient light in the area. As a general rule for capturing all lightning, you want to be using a sturdy tripod, and you also want to be able to trigger your shutter either with a cable release or a lightning sensor, because you don't want to be depressing your shutter button, and that's going to introduce some camera shake into your camera and ultimately give you a blurry image. So you want to find a way to trigger your shutter remotely, either with a wireless remote or a cable remote or a lightning sensor.
For day bolts, I've been using a MIOPS trigger. I don't know why, and I have no rhyme or reason, but I have better luck during daytime with MIOPS. For my nighttime, I'm using StrikeFinder. It's nice to know that there's the big sponsor of Big Bolt Media, so I like to give them as much credit as I do my MIOPS, but I can't tell you that one's better than the other. I've just gotten used to using one during the day and one at night.
So MIOPS and StrikeFinder have sent us these to use, and we've used them at length. They both work great. They both work. They've both gotten tons of bolts, and they both missed some bolts here and there. So they work as advertised. There's a couple slight differences that I'm going to go over now. This is the MIOPS. It slides right into your hot shoe, and then you just plug it into your camera. You can turn it on up here. It has a bunch of different modes, so you can go from lightning mode to all the other modes. You can scroll through them, and so when you're in lightning mode, it has a sensitivity, and you can adjust that according to how close or how far the lightning is. You know, the highest sensitivity is 99, and if it's really far away, you want to stick with 99 or 90, and then the closer it is, the less sensitivity you need. It's really easy. They have firmware updates and stuff. They have a new model coming out soon, or it's already out. They sent one to Justin. Now we're just waiting for some lightning in a couple months so we can go test it out, and then we'll drop another review on that. But this is a really good trigger. I've caught bolts in every condition with this. You know, I missed some here and there. The StrikeFinder doesn't have any settings other than its on-off switch. So you just turn it on, the LED light comes on, lets you know it's on, and that's it. You turn it off. What the StrikeFinder does, when it's plugged into your camera, it sends a signal to your camera that where your shutter is in ready mode. So it's depressing the shutter halfway to be in ready mode, where the MIOPS, it isn't doing that. The StrikeFinder is like a fraction of a second more ready to capture that bolt than the MIOPS, and you wouldn't think that makes a difference, but it does. I've caught bolts with the StrikeFinder that the MIOPS has missed because of that. Now the trade-off with the StrikeFinder is that when it's in ready mode, then you can't adjust your settings. For example, I shoot with a Canon 5D Mark IV, and I can adjust my shutter and my aperture only. I have to unplug StrikeFinder from my camera in order to adjust the ISO speed, or re-level my camera, or adjust other things, or even review the shots that I just taken. So a lot of camera functions are disabled because your camera is in ready mode. That's one of the kind of odd drawbacks, but we'll take it because it's a fraction of a second quicker. So none of these lightning triggers really work when the lightning's super far away, like 50 to 80 miles. That's a little bit too far. When you photograph lightning, your kind of sweet spot zone is you want to be 10 to 20 miles away is perfect, because you're safe and that's a good place to get great bolts. That's kind of like your sweet spot. The lightning triggers are going to work, and you're close enough to get awesome bolts, and you're far enough away to be safe. So that's your sweet spot, 10 to 20 miles away from the core of a thunderstorm. Ultimately, these are great. Recommend them. They make lightning shooting a lot easier. Saves clicks on your shutter, which is good, because the more clicks on your shutter, the faster your camera will go bye-bye. If you're going to shoot lightning in the daytime, you need to get a lightning sensor. You don't need them so much at night, because your shutter's open for 20, 25, 30 seconds at a time, so you're more likely to capture a bolt that way. Good to use them at night to save shutter clicks, if that's something that worries you. Sometimes it worries me. But there you go. There's your pros and cons. They both work great. I'd recommend either one. Fairly inexpensive. We love them. I'm gonna use them more and more every time. All right. go capture some bolts. So we've really enjoyed making this tutorial series for you on how to photograph lightning. I hope you enjoyed it, hope you got a little education on it, and hopefully you go out there and catch some really cool bolts. It's a lot of fun, it's addicting, it's dangerous, but we have a blast and we're addicted to it. This is the 4th and final episode in our tutorial series. We'll make some more tutorials on gear and some miscellaneous stuff down the road, but mostly once storm season ramps up in a month or two, then we're going to be on to kind of adventure vlogs chasing these storms, and we'll refer you back to these episodes now and then so you can, if you're new to photography and you want to be able to capture lightning, you'll have something to reference from us. So thanks for watching, we appreciate it, and we'll see you next time. Peace.